Welcome to another episode of the Ecommerce podcast. Today is with a dear friend of mine, John Lin, and he's actually an expert itself about China and the ecosystem of Chinese e-commerce. For me, it's always very inspiring to talk to him. I know him for about 5 years now, and every time I learn something new, and I thought it would be a great chance to have him on the podcast with us and share a little bit more on what D2C brands in the Western world can learn from China e-commerce ecosystems. Hope you enjoy. Thank you so much, John, for joining this podcast. Pretty cool. It's been quite a journey the last 5 years, at least since I've met you. We were both very much into China e-commerce back then, and you still are. And I've been keeping up with all the latest news actually by following you on LinkedIn. What are you up to these days? Like recently, what's new for you?
Thank you for having me, Simon, and good to see you again. And also glad to hear that my LinkedIn is working as a newsletter marketing channel. Yeah, what I'm up to these days. So sharing more about Chinese e-commerce, Chinese tech companies, consulting companies, especially Western companies. So how they can learn from Chinese innovation, how they need to watch out and take them seriously. A lot of Western companies don't take their Chinese competition seriously. And that's potentially very dangerous. So spreading the real story about China and helping companies, Western companies, compete with the Chinese ones or also learn from them.
Where do you see the danger specifically?
Chinese companies move really fast. And if you don't take them seriously, don't put them on your radar, you will notice way too late. And you actually see this happening with Temu or Temu. A few years ago, they didn't exist, and now they're in the top 5 of e-commerce leaders and market share. And it happens within 2 years.
Because we know each other when you were working at the number one marketplace, at least in Belgium, Netherlands.
Yeah.
We had this conversation, and you were just so excited about the China ecosystem, the e-commerce ecosystem. And you wanted to replicate that as well locally so that you actually can take the lessons that you see and put it into practice. I think that was a tough journey itself, but when the last 5 years, but also like how would you describe then that ecosystem that you've been trying to copy and bring to marketplaces and what you've been talking about actually during your keynote speeches, the consultancy, and whenever people ask you about this?
Yeah, I was actually the crazy Chinese guy in the team telling about how things should be done because we're like 10, 15 years behind in China. The interesting thing about China is that you have a few companies that have the whole chain in-house. So that means like inspiring people what they want to buy. So that's the social media part, but also the media part, the games, the music, the videos. Then they can channel that interest into a place where people can buy it, the shop. That can be Taobao or a shop within WeChat or TikTok or Douyin these days. And they can also do the payment and also be in control of the logistics. Like the whole chain is in one place, and a customer can never leave an app and still be doing his or her thing. And if you compare it to the West, it's totally segmented. You have all these different places. Like if I want to find a product, here you start at Google, then you go to a shop, you find the product you want, you put it in the cart, then you need to pay, then you go to the app of your bank, then you go back to the shop, and then you go to your email, thank you for your order. And if you want to know where your package is, you need to go to the app of the fulfillment company. It's all over the place.
Creating that ecosystem, which part can Western companies then particularly learn from? Because you describe it as really being segmented, and integrating it might be a challenge, because what I've seen in a recent event is that there's a lot of different niche players in Europe, but also in the US, doing their thing within the supply chain or within their certain scope, but in a way also competing with all the other players within that same supply chain. So that I think the starting point might be also very different. So how do you actually learn from that or replicate this kind of ecosystem then?
Yeah, so the interesting thing is if you look at the Western companies, they are siloed. So Facebook used to be, okay, we are a social media company, we sell ads, we connect the advertiser to the customer. But also they are starting to think differently because Mark Zuckerberg is, he is American, but his wife is Chinese. I don't know what's her passport, but Zuckerberg speaks Mandarin for a bit. So he knows what's happening in China. So you see Facebook or Meta adding shopping capabilities because, oh yeah, the customer is there. So maybe we can sell also a product at a time. And maybe we can also do the payment. So in Europe at least, Meta already has their banking license. So they want to go also into the transaction part, what happens in China with Alipay. So you see them doing those things. But I think if you look at those companies internally, how they're organized, At Facebook, their main business goal is still selling ads. They are less holistic, and it's also Amazon also cut up their companies in different pieces that need to compete with each other. Alibaba will be doing the same with their splits, but that's after the fact that they already created the ecosystem, and that's quite hard. Like, how do you split this up? And I think Chinese companies can be more entrepreneurial in like doing those acquisitions, building these new pieces of infrastructure, and also integrating that. And you need a more long-term vision for that. And my experience with Western companies, like, okay, if say something takes longer than 3 years to earn back money, they're not very keen to do those things.
When we talk about ecosystem, maybe it's good to just describe like what would be a definition of an ecosystem. When is an ecosystem, and when is it you as a single player playing your part within something?
Yeah, so you have different definitions of ecosystems. One of them is like the biological one, like if you kill one part of the in a forest, and the whole forest in the end will die. That's the biological one. But you also have the digital versions, and that's I think one of the most famous ones is Apple's ecosystem of Apple products. If you have one, it works better if you also have the rest as well. The same thing applies to like the digital ecosystems of Google, of Alibaba, and Tencent. If you are in it, you need to use all the other services because they all enhance each other. And if you want to get out, it's really hard because your data is there, your preferences are stored there, they know you, so they can personalize the services. It also means, like, as a company, if you organize yourself in such a way that you say, okay, one part of the business is allowed to lose a lot of money as long as I can earn it back somewhere else. That's super weird because you will kill off other competitors like Amazon with Amazon Prime. You get Prime Video with that. How can you, like, only Netflix, only the big guys can compete. But if you're a smaller startup and you want to do video streaming, you can never compete with Amazon because they never need to make any money. And they bought different video studio companies to fill Amazon Prime Video. But the interesting thing is, like, if you are two smaller companies, like if you're a retailer and you want to partner up with another video streaming service to have an offering against Amazon, it's always hard because you always have discussions. Okay, who is going to pay who for the service? No one wants to lose money. But yeah, if you are Jeff Bezos, you can say, okay, Prime Video division, don't care about money, just make great content. And we figure out the rest for you later in the chain. And this is the thing with the digital ecosystems. You'll have all these different parts that work together, and it's super easy for the consumer. But if you really look at the money, where it's flowing, and how one thing keeps you in and the money is earned somewhere else, that makes it super complex. That also makes it hard to copy, and it also makes it hard to compete as a new player.
It sounds like this is also what probably Temu, AliExpress, Shein might be doing then as well. Is that the case? Because they're selling for a very low price. Is this kind of their subsidized business unit, and they're running multiple other units that are generating the cash?
Especially if you look at Temu, they have a big mother company, Pinduoduo, in China. I think they have hundreds of thousands or millions of sellers on that platform already. So they don't have to do the hard work of finding the sellers if they want to launch a new platform. It's just adding that to that same base. So that's why they can open up a new store somewhere else, already fill the sellers, fill with content, and then start to begin. So that saves like 5 years for a new startup who wants to do that. And that's also why regulators don't like this big platform behavior. But this platform, like, you have one flywheel and you put another flywheel on top of that, and then you're starting to create your whole retail ecosystem, because it only gets bigger and bigger and bigger if you use the same base you already had. And that's for Shine. They don't have a seller. They don't have a base in China, but they connected to like the whole clothing industry ecosystem that was already there. That was mainly created by the Zara's, the H&M's, and all the other fashion brands. They put their factories there, and then Shine came along. Oh, we can use this to make stuff and sell.
For European companies or for Western companies, then how can you learn from this? Because we're a few years ahead behind. Is it still something that we can catch up with? There's always, whenever it comes to technologies and improvement, you can be ahead of the curve, but then at some point it slows things down, and then actually a new mover can actually catch up much faster and go beyond the level of other players might be running the game. So how do you see that? What is it that we should learn from it, or what we should do differently as a Western company to compete with these prize fighters, so to say?
I think within digital, this innovation law, like when you become too large and you have too much legacy, it's not always true in digital innovation, because if you have 1 billion users on your platform, it's really hard to get those billion users, especially like if in social media, because you have people interacting with each other. Like what TikTok did, getting 1 billion users in 3 years, that's really special. That doesn't happen often. It's not easy, and I think it's super cool that a Chinese company could do it. The way they grow, the way they are so aggressive, makes tech companies and also usually the American ones, but now also the Chinese ones. They make them really powerful, and it's really hard to go into that. And the US has their own big tech companies that can innovate very hard. China already has their own tech companies, but Europe has nothing. Europe relies on the US for that, and Europe sanctions like the Googles and the Apples, and also they want to sanction the Chinese ones. Like Europe regulates. That's the meme. But where are the European ones? And I think that goes down to regulation, legislation. It's super hard to build a big startup in Europe because tariffs, laws, different languages, different tax laws in different countries. Uh, I think from a European standpoint, you should make that easier for good startup companies here.
Does it still make sense for a company to jump in and fill a gap somewhere?
I think for sure, like TikTok came out of nothing 5 years ago. We didn't even know what it was, and it's a purely social company with a different type of algorithm use how they could get you into that app. So you see a lot of companies that didn't exist 5 years ago and that they have 1 billion users 5 years later. It can still be done, but you need to be aggressive. And they call this the race to 1 billion. If you're not growing fast enough, you leave too much space for someone who will copy you or make an adaptation of your business model.
That's obviously much harder for European countries where their foundation is relatively smaller compared to China or the US, which to acquire 1 billion is already very fragmented within
Yeah.
the European network itself. So besides regulation, it's probably also due to just the size of the countries in Europe itself. But teaming up is happening in Europe as well on multiple levels as well. So in that sense,
Yeah, you need to team up because you're not strong enough on your own, especially not to compete with the American and the Chinese one. So we in Dutch we call it polderen, so everyone does their own thing. Yeah, that's not the way. We should think way bigger. In the Netherlands alone, we have 10 different e-commerce players that share, I think, the top 60% of the market. Well, even if you go to China, you have three players sharing 80% of the market. So we are way too fragmented. Everyone is doing their own thing. You should team up together, make each other bigger, and then you have an answer for the rest.
do you think it's then does it have to do with the mindset or with thinking not thinking big enough?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Everyone here is very comfortable. Did you notice that when you moved back from China to Europe?
For sure, yeah. So, I mean, the size itself, our compound was more than 100,000 people itself. Now living in a village with 30,000 people. So if you want something fixed in your house, it can be fixed instantly. It's very much consumer driven, but that's also because of the size. It's not really feasible to do it here in a productive way, but therefore you have to wait for much longer to get something fixed or solved. But you see also the intention of people are maybe not today, but then tomorrow, or having actually relying on a balanced life, focusing on working full time or part time with kids, running a household, having your family, friends nearby as well. That creates also more different kind of pressure. Where in China, people are far remote from their own families. You don't really see them. So you also don't have to worry too much about planning for that, other than picking up the phone and making a call. So the dynamics are definitely different in that sense. But entrepreneurship, I think, is everywhere. It's more like where you surround yourself with. There are plenty of entrepreneurs actively trying to create something, and maybe they're a little bit too modest on what it could be, what the impact could really be for the long term.
Yeah, thinking bigger. Everyone talks about having B hacks here in the West, but I think if you want to learn how to think big, go to China.
Because that's what I experienced in 2019. There were a lot of Western companies. I was then in China. A lot of Western companies came to China for inspiration, to actually learn what's happening in China. I mean, before it was very different, obviously. And then before it was more to sell something to the Chinese market, a service, a solution, or whatever it was. And then it became actually to learn from China. Obviously, COVID happened. I think it's picking up now again. But there's a few years that passed, and I would almost say like 1 year in China is a dog year, because it's like 7x
Yeah.
of what is developing. So players that are suddenly disappeared or continue to grow. In the last few years, we did see a few growing tremendously. We focus on B2C supply chain out of China. So obviously Shine, Temu, they're very big players. And we see also that it becomes more and more difficult for a D2C brand to compete. So how would you see that as developing going forward? What is it that actually a D2C brand can do differently, or maybe even can learn from what these players are doing?
The interesting thing is that they are usually more used to using data in their product development, figuring out what customers should and want to buy, because they are also local minded. They are local, and that's something that will always be harder for a Chinese manufacturer being in China selling on Temu, because they don't actually know what the trend is in Belgium and what the Belgian consumer wants. They do it by approximation. And if you are like a Western D2C brand, you know what's happening here. And if you have the right relation with your supplier, manufacturer, the right rights, also important, then you can make those adaptations really fast, have products that you cannot find somewhere else. Because the time of buying something in China and just selling it here for a higher price, that's over. That's what Temu in China are breaking. So you need to do something special. You need to add value for the customer. But because you are local, you know what the customer wants, but also apply that to, talk to that with your manufacturer.
Episode 13 is actually really about that, of having a D2C brand actually customizing the product, taking the feedback from the consumer, building a community, building a brand, and improve the product just by iterations, not per se just by having a random product that everyone is selling, but actually making improvements and actually standing out. And therefore you can sell it for a higher price, and you're no longer competing on price because you're creating something. Like, still, whenever you buy an iPhone, there are plenty of other phones to buy, but still people tend to buy that. So it's...
And also the interesting thing is, like, I hear a lot of entrepreneurs, so we did this, and then some Chinese manufacturer copied our product and sold it for something cheaper. So I actually have a background in innovation science. And the interesting thing is, like, you can always patent your thing, trademark it, copyright, whatever. But in the end, even if you have a patent, it expires after 10 years, just like the Nespresso cups, then you will have copies. The only real way to protect your innovation is to innovate. Just make a better version every time, and then your competitor will always be one step behind. That's the only way. Or you create the ecosystem, what Apple is doing, having more products that work together, make something more out of it.
I saw that with Lego as well. Lego patent disappeared or was expired. And then there were a lot of people jumping into it and trying to recreate what they were leveraging. And nobody was able to create the same quality.
And also, like, their storytelling with the product.
The storytelling, the cooperation, the co-branding with different...
the deals. Yeah.
So these kind of things separates them, obviously, from the rest. For smaller, medium-sized brands, it might be a little bit more challenging, but maybe you have some suggestions for how they could stand.
Interesting is, like, if you look at the smaller, medium-sized brands, what they usually have is a very, like, community-driven, loyal customer base. If you look at in the beauty healthcare space, the influencers making their own brands, those people are super loyal. Like, it doesn't matter if someone has a knockoff; they want it from that person or that brand. And I think that was last time with a nail. The gel nail, it's not my type product, a gel nail company. The nail company, their customer base is super loyal. So whatever they bring out, they will buy it, and they make limited editions, and everyone is always super cool about them. So there are a lot of you can buy these nails super cheap on Temu or AliExpress or Shine, but their customer base doesn't care about that. So building your fan base is super important.
We now actually have these conversations with our clients. It's about LTV. It's not about the first purchase. It's about the next purchase and the purchase after and the purchase after. If you can have increased that, and obviously your ad spends go down, your loyalty goes up, your rebuy rate goes up, everything is basically going in your favor. But the willingness then to take a hit, maybe in the beginning, of losing money to get started, with the vision of building something long term that you actually have value for the long term for the client base you want to serve. I think that's also exactly what you described with the nail. People tend to go where they are comfortable with and what they used to.
I think last time you had a LinkedIn post about the get rich quick sellers. This is in contrast to their strategy.
Yes.
Totally the opposite of, buy a product, sell it on Amazon and get rich and lay on the beach. Yeah, that's not buying a business. That's just buying something and selling something and hope you earn some money.
Yeah, that's the reason I left the previous company, not because the company was bad. It was really that kind of audience that I just didn't feel connected to. And us now working with D2C brand owners that actually want to build an LTV, want to have a brand for the long term, has to be very strong in one niche. Like building a community within a niche, whether it's travel, beauty, well-being, gaming, whatever it is, they want to stand out in that niche and build that community. And I think then listening to what this consumer wants, making some exclusive products that you can only get at a certain time, certain moment, get that engagement going. That's something that Temu will never create because it's a platform, search engine driven, based on price, I would say.
Sounds way more fun to work with people who want to build long-lasting companies, right?
For sure. And for us, the upside is that the top clients also remain pretty much the same. You don't have to continuously acquire clients because you're building something together. That makes a journey so much more fun for both of us because you're part of the journey. So I know that you always look at technology. Let's say we described a little bit these small, medium-sized D2C brand owners, the Western players. How can they leverage technology better? Because you see Facebook is trying to do checkouts, payment solutions. Temu is coming, marketplaces, they're also trying to figure out their current position, at least the local ones, but also the Chinese ones. How can the smaller players leverage technology then more effectively?
The cool thing for small, medium enterprises, like if you don't have your own developers in house, or only if you have like a few developers, you don't have to build anything yourself. A lot of stuff is you can just buy it, and you also won't differentiate from your competitor with most of these things. So, for instance, if you want to have cool image search functionality, yeah, Google Cloud, Amazon Cloud, Alibaba Cloud, they all have their product. You can just get it from there. The same thing applies these days with the Chat GPTs, the language models. Everyone has a language model. Meta released one in September, open source for everyone to use. You don't need to build everyone yourselves. It's just finding out what's on the shelf, what can you get, and also partnering up with the right companies that can help you with it, because you are way too slow if you do it on your own.
You can integrate with a lot of things. A lot of our clients doing Shopify, and there's a lot of Shopify apps, and but even outside that, there are different solutions available, SaaS solutions that you can use that are built also for your size of companies. The larger companies normally want to have their in-house system, but for smaller size, it's not necessary. You should not try to develop something yourself.
Especially with all the big AI innovations, even the largest e-commerce player in the Netherlands, Bol, they have, I think, 2,000 to 3,000 employees with more than 100 IT development teams. A company as that is not big enough to build their own language model. They also source one from the outside and maybe get an open source one because they don't have the capabilities in-house to do that. So even if big companies like that need to source like their search engines or language models, yeah, who are you with 10 developers to build one on your own?
All the players are searching for their position or reclaiming their position or trying to find their own position. What is your expectation on how global e-commerce is in that sense going to develop going forward?
It's really hard to say because every 3 years you have a new player being successful coming around the block. No one 5 years ago, no one knew Temu, Shine, or TikTok, and Wish was still a thing back then. So that's really hard. I think, yeah, you can look at the market in different ways. So if you look at TikTok, which I believe will be a big player if they can be successful in acquiring enough merchants and the content, they will be like the ones who are really good in like impulse buying, because you average user spends there for 2 hours per day, and then they see something they didn't know they want to buy, and then they click on the pay button, and then you have it at home. That's a different type of player. Like you go to a Bol or Amazon for, okay, I need to buy something. I know what I want. I go there. TikTok is like, I didn't know I want to buy something, but I came across it, I buy it. And then if you want to score a deal or something cheap, then it's Shine or Temu. But the interesting thing is, like, when you look at the demographics as well, mostly highly educated parents with small children, like the young families, they usually shop at the more expensive local marketplace platforms because they want fast shipping, they don't want the hassle, they want good customer service because they don't have time to waste. If you have time to waste, you're on TikTok or on Temu. So you have different demographics in different apps. Those platforms know that really well, which is their demographic. So they tailor the customer journey for them. And then somehow at the end, you have a company writing a market share report, seeing who has how much market share. But it actually doesn't say like which customer is shopping at which marketplace, because it's not very evident that a Temu shopper will shop at Bol as well. Maybe if they need the Pampers or a MacBook, but then they waste their time on Temu.
You mentioned TikTok. Obviously, TikTok got very big for influencers. A lot of influencers are using TikTok to get their own position within the space. How do you see influencers being used here in the Western world versus the Chinese world, and how is it different?
In Asia, it's crazy, especially in China. I think more than 50% of all online purchases go through a social touchpoint. So that means usually an influencer. In the West, we're not there yet. It has multiple reasons. So one reason is cultural. In Chinese culture, if a friend or a family member says this is something you need to do, you usually trust them, you go do it. And people usually see the influencer as a good friend because they see that person every day. So there's way more trust in someone else's recommendation. In the Western world, it's way more individualistic. You do your research on your own. You decide for yourself. So if an influencer says you need to buy something, there's a cultural barrier between it. That is changing though, especially if you look at the younger generation. My nieces who are playing Roblox and Minecraft every day. They play the game, but they spend more hours watching influencers play the game. So for sure, those will be more influenceable to buy stuff from the influencer. So I think that will change. And the second thing, the infrastructure isn't here yet. So you cannot buy something from a stream, from a video just yet. Instagram is trying to do this with the shoppable pictures, but the e-commerce companies are still just way too functional compared to the Chinese e-commerce companies. But I think TikTok will be the first ones, because they already do this in China in a big way, to add the buy button to make sure people can purchase right from a video. And in the US, they partnered with Amazon. So you can even see an Amazon button within the TikTok app. I think TikTok will be the catalyst to make sure that videos will be shoppable.
You mentioned the infrastructure, the functionality, but why is it so hard to get that added to these features?
It comes from two directions. Like a site as Bol or Amazon, they are super functional. They are conversions happens within 5 minutes. Someone comes on the site, looks for something, buys it, goes away. You see a direction that they want to make shopping more entertaining, add videos, add more content, try to make people stick longer, but that fights with their main KPI, and that's conversion. It's super hard to think of in companies like that to create something more entertaining. And then you have a company like Meta with Instagram and Facebook. For years they tried to add the buy button. But for them, the problem is we don't have the shopping infrastructure. We don't have the merchants. We don't want to handle the checkout. We don't want to handle customer service because that sucks. So they never actually had big focus on how to do that infrastructure. Google is trying to do it with Google Shopping Actions. In the US, they failed because Amazon has way too much market share. So everyone starts on Amazon. So no one starts on Google over there. Here in the West, it's different. Google is the starting point of shopping. And Google wants to do it here. But also they actually haven't built up that capability. And I think if you look at the TikTok job site, they have job offerings for logistics specialists, warehouse managers, e-com operations. They're actually building a marketplace infrastructure for themselves. And you just don't see Meta and Google doing it. I think it's partly priority.
Because I know that in a TikTok shop is existing in the UK, US, I think Australia, Singapore, a few countries, but not yet in the EU. What is the reason behind that? It's not, if this is the next one that we need to watch, so to say, as innovator, what is then stopping them currently to move into, be more active in the EU?
I think one of the things for marketplaces that are super hard to fix, they call it items per shipment. How much orders can you put in one shipment? And the problem with TikTok is, it's all over the place. If it's our cheap products, you click one, and then if it creates a shipment, it's very expensive. And in Europe, the shipping costs are just very high, especially Asia, and in the US, they are also not yet very successful. So you want to somehow aggregate the shipments to create more efficient fulfillment. And I think that it makes sense for TikTok to work together with Amazon in the US because Amazon has way too many warehouses, so they can aggregate orders. You see in Europe that TikTok is looking for fulfillment partners. So I think in the UK's PPAC, they want TikTok fulfillment to make sure they can aggregate the orders and lower the shipping costs. Because if you let the customers pay the shipping costs, it will become way too expensive. Customers won't buy anything. But if you subsidize it, you will also bleed to death. So you need to figure out a way to do that. And I think that makes it harder in Europe because shipping costs are just through the roof here.
But that's for me is also a little bit surprised because the mother company of TikTok, Douyin, is also a Chinese company.
Yeah.
The mother company of Temu is Pinduoduo, is also a Chinese company. Both Douyin and Pinduoduo are selling products in China. They have this own supply chain network to be able to fulfill orders there. What is stopping TikTok for running a similar model as Timo is doing?
And so they are looking now, I think, in most of the countries for a fulfillment partner because building a warehouse yourself takes a long time. So they are looking for fulfillment parties to do that with them. So TikTok is doing this, and I think also Temu is also looking for fulfillment partners. Ali is a different beast. They are building their own. They have their own logistics companies already here, so they are building this on their own. At some point, they're all gonna do that.
Because that's the conversations also that we've had in the past months as well is, okay, we have Timo and Shine, they're competing together and they also go to court against each other. You have local marketplaces trying to push these players out as long as possible or keep them away so that they can sustain their market share. But the Chinese marketplace also want to get a fulfillment location, like you said, in the local markets. So what and then should the local marketplaces then be doing? Should they then also start shipping from China? Well, Amazon decided that they're going to be doing that as well. It seems like there's kind of like a war happening between, or at least the larger players. Who in the end then do you think is gonna win this, or how is this gonna solve? Because there's enough capital with these big giants, so to say.
Usually, like the common thought about like these digital companies is winner takes all. If you look at enough markets in the world, you never see this scenario playing out. There's never one big winner, even not within China, because Alibaba used to have 80% market share, but that's now down to 50%, just because they have so great competition over there. And I think the same will happen in all the other countries, like Amazon in the US. We're over 50%. There will be some new players in the market and they will maybe go to 30, 40, 40%. And then you have a few big platforms. The hard part is like, in the end, you will leave with 4, maybe 5 big players that share 90% of the market. And then you have like 10% niche rest. That means that a lot of small, medium companies will die off or become part of sell on those platforms.
Do you think that's a good way for the development itself? Is that just is it normal that things like these are evolving into this where you have a dominant players and then a little bit of the rest, or is that something that is actually concerning you?
If you look at a lot of different industries, it always happens. So if you look at the phone industry, you see the top 5 having like 50% of the market. Car industry is around the same. Clothing industry is also around the same. And I think the food industry is even more dangerous with 3 companies doing almost everything. So you see it happen in a lot of markets. So it's basically consolidation. It will always happen at some point. And that's also the point where regulators step in. Like, is there still enough choice for customers? Won't prices go up? And maybe it's even a not so good thing in like the capitalistic system, because right now what you see is the ones who will come out on top are the ones with the biggest spending power. And all these Chinese platforms have the cash flow from the mother country, from the mothership, which is almost unlimited compared to the local players. Yeah, you can say, yeah, Chinese government subsidizes like the Chinese companies. Yeah, I think that's mostly bullshit. Those companies are just big because they have a 1 billion plus market. And the profit they make there in one quarter, they use that as pocket change to conquer Europe. Yeah, that's hard.
Do you expect the prices that will go up for these players? Do you think they're gonna continue going for as a price fighter, or
In the end, if like the market consolidates, it stabilizes, prices will always go up. So in a price war, consumer wins. If there are only 3 big players left, then the consumer starts losing. What you see in China is like every 5 years, there seems to be a new guy, a new kid on the block, and that increases competition again. So you hope that happens also in other markets. But if you look at the Dutch market or the German market or the Japanese market, the competitors have always been the same for the last 10, 15 years. So there's not much changing in the way of shopping and competition. But I think with the entrance of the Chinese players, everyone is running for their money.
how is regulations or regulators going to impact that? Because we had the announcement in the US becoming potentially more strict on products coming from China. Europe is also fighting against certain platforms. I mean, France has done it against Shine about the waste itself. Like, how is regulations going to impact this development?
So they will try to slow down the Chinese companies. It's a lot of political lobby with industry groups. The lobby is crazy right now because everyone wants to protect their own companies, employees against these super powerful Chinese ones. They will try to slow them down. I think they underestimate how agile the Chinese companies are. If there's a new law, they will work around it within 1 or 2 months. And maybe the prices will be 10% more expensive. Yeah, if something is €1, then it will be €1.10. Who cares? So I think that will happen. They will try to slow it down, but yeah, we know that Temu and Shine are acquiring European and American sellers. They are already trying to localize. They are already ahead of the curve, trying to anticipate for these moves. It's inevitable that they are here to stay.
Yeah, it's a big shakeup in the industry, and maybe just waking up that there is actually different ways to do things. Maybe not better ways, but different ways, and finding what is the new way or what's the next way. I think that's it requires a lot of innovation, pivoting, and being agile, as you say. I think this is also pretty much what you speak about when you are asked to be a keynote speaker. This is probably one of the topics. So when I was wondering, like when you get on the stage, what do you want the audience to mainly take away from your speech, from your talks?
Yeah, mainly that China is not the same China as like 20, 30 years ago. Everyone has the same image from the 80s. But that's not China anymore. China is an innovative, competitive, safe, fun country. So we need to take them seriously. We can also learn from them. They have become our equals, maybe even better. So we need to peacefully learn with them, better partner up with them.
What kind of feedback do you normally get? Because your audience is normally less China aware, I would say. What's normally the response that you get after this kind of speeches?
Yeah, so one part they are scared, like, but mostly because, oh shit, I didn't notice. I had no clue that this was happening, and one part it makes them scared, one part it makes them excited because oh, there's a lot of things that can happen. I think also what is important, I bring it in a more humorous, inspirational way. I may also make all the racist jokes because I still can, but it really helps to make it more light and let people think, okay, it's also good what's happening. We need to make sure that we keep an eye on this.
Cool. Is there anything that you would like to share to wrap up the podcast episode?
Yeah, not really. I think go to China if you have the chance. It's easier than ever for some countries with the 15-day free travel. It's easier than ever, and see it for yourself.
It's easier than ever right now for most countries. And yeah, normally I tend to go there twice a year myself and then spend time there. I mean, it's changing, and I think that's normal. The society has changed itself after COVID in particular, but it's still very fascinating itself. Fascinating place to learn from. We always recommend also, if you're listening, but also our brand owners, the clients that we serve, go visit your factories, come visit our warehouse, come explore how different life is, but in a way also how engaging and how exciting life can be, and just get out of your daily routine and experience something else, because there are different ways. I was just in Hong Kong last week, and then for some of the people went to mainland China, to Shenzhen. It took really 10 minutes to get one person ready to go into China. They had to download WeChat, they had to get Alipay, they have to get a map to be able to figure out where they are, and they can still read where they are as well. So there were a little already obstacles for that person just to cross the border. And do you know, everything you have now is not going to work tomorrow. Oh, how am I going to get the taxi? How am I going to go there? How am I going to know where I need to be? It scares a little bit. It scares people a little bit, but I think it's more about how you look at it. It can be very fun. I mean, it's a safe place. If you get stuck somewhere, someone will help you. And I've had people paying for my taxi because my WeChat didn't work or whatever, didn't have. In Hong Kong, I was expecting everyone to scan the code and then pay for that. I could pay with WeChat or Alipay. I didn't have enough cash. So Hong Kong needs to be cash in a taxi. So I had to ask someone to pay for me and then pay it back later in a different way. So
Hong Kong is interesting. Somehow it's like 20 years stuck in time.
it's very interesting. I think there's a whole different episode itself. But yeah.
I think what the most interesting thing in China is like if you walk around the compounds, you always see like the racks or the tables with the delivery packages just laying there. Like no one cares, no one steals them. It's
Yeah.
always okay.
Yeah.
Don't try that here in Holland.
Nope. No. Now, people get punished for that, even the delivery companies, if you lie it around on the front of your door without informing them about it.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah.
Cool. I will continue following you, John. Also, mainly LinkedIn, I guess, is the best way for people to follow you.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. I'll keep you posted on our developments as well. Appreciate you here in our podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, man.
This was maybe a little bit of a different podcast episode, less about the supply chain, but I think still very valuable because you learn about actually the ecosystem itself, how it's different from Asia versus the West, and how these are actually more and more merging together into what the future platforms are going to look like. For you as a D2C brand, crucial to be aware of what's your niche, what's your sweet spot, but also how can you leverage these platforms, such as things like TikTok that has been mentioned, that you can leverage to be able to get more traffic, get more orders, and actually build your community. Hope you enjoyed the episode, and see you on the next one.